Historical records indicate that within the Byzantine imperial system, the position of empress carried both extraordinary visibility and profound vulnerability. The court of Constantinople functioned not merely as a residence of rulership, but as a densely layered political arena in which proximity to the emperor created both influence and exposure. Contemporary accounts describe how imperial women could exercise authority through patronage networks, religious foundations, regency arrangements, and dynastic legitimacy. Yet the same structures that enabled power also facilitated sudden removal. Palace coups involving empresses rarely unfolded as spontaneous acts of violence. Instead, surviving documents suggest calculated sequences of negotiation, isolation, legal manipulation, and ceremonial degradation that transformed once public sovereign figures into controlled political liabilities. Chroniclers noted that Byzantine governance depended heavily on the perceived stability of imperial continuity. When emperors died, became incapacitated, or faced military opposition, empresses often emerged as crucial intermediaries between competing factions. This prominence made them central to the politics of succession. Legal codes of the period reveal that imperial marriage conferred legitimacy that could not easily be replicated through military proclamation alone. As a result, removing an empress was not merely a domestic matter, but a strategic act aimed at redefining dynastic authority. Court officials, military commanders, patriarchal authorities, and palace eunuchs frequently participated in these transitions, demonstrating the institutional nature of such removals rather than their reduction to personal rivalries. The experience of Empress Martina illustrates the structural dynamics surrounding palace displacement. After the death of Emperor Heraclius in the 7th century, Martina attempted to preserve her authority through the elevation of her son Heraclonas. Contemporary accounts describe immediate resistance from segments of the military and Senate who questioned both the legitimacy of the succession and Martina's influence over imperial decision-making. Surviving chronicles suggest that accusations of manipulation and fears of concentrated familial control encouraged opposition figures to mobilize. The resulting coup did not produce immediate execution. Instead, Martina and her son were subjected to mutilation and exile, practices that legal and ceremonial traditions had long employed to disqualify individuals from rule without creating martyrdom. Chroniclers noted the cutting of Martina's tongue, a punishment intended to prevent political speech and symbolic authority, reflecting how physical alteration served administrative purposes within Byzantine political culture. The mechanisms evident in Martina's removal reappear across later centuries, demonstrating continuity in the empire's approach to controlling imperial women perceived as politically disruptive. Empress Irene, one of the most consequential female rulers in Byzantine history, navigated these dynamics both as participant and eventual victim of palace intrigue. Historical records indicate that Irene initially consolidated authority as regent for her son Constantine VI, relying on alliances with court eunuchs and iconophile clergy during the iconoclast controversies. Her eventual decision to depose and blind Constantine VI transformed her from regent into sole ruler, a development that contemporary accounts describe as unprecedented and deeply controversial. Irene's reign, while administratively functional in several respects, generated opposition rooted in ideological, military, and gendered anxieties concerning female sovereignty. Surviving documents suggest that Irene's downfall emerged not from immediate revolt, but from gradual erosion of elite confidence. Fiscal pressures, diplomatic tensions with the Frankish West, and dissatisfaction among military commanders created an environment in which palace officials could justify intervention. Chroniclers noted that Irene was deposed by her own finance minister, Nikephoros, in a coup that emphasized bureaucratic coordination rather than military confrontation. The removal followed a familiar pattern: confinement within the palace, forced abdication, and exile to a monastery. Legal codes of the period reveal that monastic confinement functioned as a politically acceptable method of neutralization, allowing authorities to frame the transition as both lawful and spiritually appropriate while eliminating the possibility of organized resistance. Theodora, the widow of Emperor Theophilos, provides another example in which regency created both opportunity and risk. Historical records indicate that Theodora governed as regent for her son Michael III, overseeing the restoration of icon veneration and managing administrative affairs with the assistance of trusted officials. Contemporary accounts describe her regency as relatively stable, Yet the maturation of Michael III altered the balance of power. Surviving chronicles suggest that court factions seeking greater influence over the emperor viewed Theodora's continued authority as an obstacle. The eventual coup did not rely on public accusation or violence, but on controlled familial negotiation. Theodora was compelled to retire to a convent alongside her daughters, demonstrating how removal could be framed as an orderly dynastic adjustment rather than a punitive act. The political function of monastic exile appears repeatedly in the documented fate of Byzantine empresses. Chroniclers noted that convent confinement allowed authorities to maintain the appearance of moral propriety while ensuring surveillance and limiting communication. Unlike imprisonment, monastic removal aligned with prevailing religious expectations, reducing the likelihood of public sympathy transforming into political unrest. Legal and ecclesiastical cooperation, therefore, became central to palace coups involving women of imperial status. Patriarchal approval, or at minimum acquiescence, often provided the moral framework necessary to legitimize the transition. Empress Zoe's turbulent career in the 11th century further demonstrates how palace coups could intersect with popular sentiment. Historical records indicate that Zoe, as a Macedonian dynasty heir, possessed immense symbolic legitimacy that outlasted multiple marriages and shifting political alliances. Contemporary accounts describe her repeated displacement and restoration, illustrating that removal did not always equate to permanent exclusion. When Zoe and her sister Theodora were briefly sidelined during the reign of Michael V, public unrest erupted in Constantinople. Chroniclers noted that urban crowds demanded Zoe's restoration, forcing the coup's architects to reverse their actions. This episode reveals that while palace conspiracies operated within elite networks, broader urban populations could influence outcomes when dynastic legitimacy resonated strongly with public identity. Nevertheless, Zoe's experiences also highlight the limits of such support. Surviving documents suggest that even after restoration, Zoe's authority remained constrained by court officials and successive husbands who exercised practical control over governance. The oscillation between visibility and restriction demonstrates the unstable equilibrium faced by imperial women whose legitimacy could not easily be erased, but whose autonomy could be incrementally reduced through administrative mechanisms. Anna Damascene, though not crowned as empress in her own right, played a critical role during the rise of the Comnenian dynasty and illustrates another dimension of political removal. Historical records indicate that her influence as the mother of Alexios I Komnenos granted her substantial authority during periods of imperial absence. Contemporary accounts describe her administrative competence and involvement in palace governance. Yet surviving chronicles also suggest that her eventual withdrawal from political life followed deliberate efforts to centralize authority around the emperor and his immediate marital household. While not the result of a violent coup, her removal from active governance reflects the broader pattern in which influential imperial women could be gradually displaced once their political utility diminished. Later centuries continued to demonstrate similar patterns. Empress Maria of Antioch's regency for her son Alexios too encountered hostility from aristocratic factions that perceived her reliance on foreign advisors as destabilizing. Chroniclers noted that the rise of Andronikos Komnenos culminated in Maria's arrest and execution following a coup that mobilized both court insiders and popular resentment. Her fate underscores that while monastic exile remained common, execution was not absent when political narratives framed an empress as a threat to imperial survival. Across these cases, surviving documents suggest that palace coups targeting empresses were rarely impulsive seizures of power. Instead, they reflected a sophisticated interplay of ceremonial law, religious legitimacy, bureaucratic coordination, and calculated public messaging. The removal process often unfolded through stages: the construction of political accusations, the isolation of the empress from loyal networks, the securing of patriarchal or senatorial approval, and the final imposition of exile, confinement, or physical disqualification. Chroniclers consistently emphasized the importance of maintaining imperial dignity even during removal, indicating that the preservation of institutional continuity outweighed personal considerations. The lived reality for displaced empresses varied considerably. Some experienced relative comfort within monastic settings, retaining limited correspondence and patronage capabilities. Others faced harsher confinement, surveillance, or physical punishment intended to prevent political reemergence. Contemporary accounts describe the psychological dimensions of such transitions with restraint, yet the recurring emphasis on silence, enclosure, and ceremonial stripping of status suggests an acute awareness of the transformation from public authority to controlled obscurity. Long-term effects of these removals extended beyond individual lives. Historical records indicate that repeated coups contributed to an atmosphere of uncertainty within the imperial household, shaping marriage strategies, succession planning, and the political education of imperial daughters. Surviving chronicles suggest that empresses increasingly relied on networks of eunuchs, monastic allies, and family members to mitigate vulnerability, reflecting an adaptive response to the structural risks embedded within Byzantine court life. The empire's political culture thus produced a paradox in which imperial women remained indispensable to legitimacy while simultaneously occupying positions of persistent precarity. The documented fate of these empresses reveals not merely episodes of personal downfall, but the operational logic of Byzantine governance itself. Mechanisms designed to preserve dynastic continuity required the controlled removal of figures whose authority threatened emerging political arrangements. In this environment, palace coups functioned as administrative recalibrations carried out through ritualized procedures that blended law, theology, and pragmatic power. The empress, positioned at the intersection of family, legitimacy, and ceremony, became uniquely susceptible to these processes, embodying both the strength and fragility of imperial order. Surviving documents suggest that the Middle Byzantine period intensified the procedural nature of palace coups, particularly as administrative sophistication and court ceremonial expanded. The removal of empresses increasingly relied on coordinated institutional consent rather than isolated conspiratorial action. Eunuchs of the imperial household, members of the Senate, patriarchal representatives, and military commanders often acted in quiet alignment, reflecting a political culture in which legitimacy required visible consensus even when decisions were predetermined. Contemporary accounts describe how empresses who lost factional protection could experience rapid transitions from ceremonial prominence to enforced seclusion, with the speed of removal itself serving as a preventive measure against counter-mobilization. The case of Empress Eudokia Macrembolitissa demonstrates how regency could generate both protective authority and acute vulnerability. Historical records indicate that following the death of Constantine X Doukas, Eudokia governed as regent for her young sons, managing fiscal strain and military threats during a period of frontier instability. Legal codes of the period reveal that her regency was formally acknowledged, allowing her to issue decrees and participate in strategic decision-making. However, surviving chronicles suggest that military leaders increasingly doubted the capacity of a regency administration to address mounting external pressures. Negotiations within the court produced a calculated solution. Eudokia was encouraged to remarry Romanos for Diogenes, effectively transferring executive authority while preserving dynastic continuity. Contemporary accounts describe that this arrangement temporarily stabilized the political environment, yet the defeat of Romanos IV at the Battle of Manzikert transformed the court's perception of legitimacy and responsibility. Chroniclers noted that factions within Constantinople blamed both Romanos and the regency structure that had enabled his elevation. The resulting coup orchestrated by the Doukas family resulted in Eudokia's removal from power and her confinement to a monastery. Surviving documents suggest that her displacement was framed not as punishment, but as a necessary restoration of dynastic order, illustrating how the language of continuity often masked decisive political exclusion. The experiences of Empress Berthirene of Sulzbach provide insight into the role of foreign origin in shaping vulnerability during palace coups. Historical records indicate that as the German-born wife of Manuel I Comnenos, Irene participated in ceremonial life and dynastic representation, but exercised limited, direct administrative authority. Contemporary accounts describe the court's sensitivity to foreign influence, particularly during moments of succession uncertainty. Although Irene herself was not violently removed, surviving chronicles suggest that her marginalization following Manuel's death reflected a broader pattern in which empresses associated with external political networks faced deliberate isolation. Her diminished presence within court politics allowed domestic factions to consolidate authority around regency arrangements that excluded her participation. More explicit mechanisms of removal appear in the documented fate of Empress Maria of Antioch. After the death of Manuel I Comnenos, Maria served as regent for her young son Alexios II, relying heavily on the proto-Sebastos Alexios as a principal advisor. Chroniclers noted growing resentment among aristocratic factions who perceived the regency as dominated by foreign influence and court favoritism. Surviving documents suggest that Andronikos Komnenos capitalized on this dissatisfaction, presenting himself as a restorer of moral and political order. The coup that followed combined popular agitation with calculated palace coordination. Maria was arrested, subjected to formal accusations of treasonous governance, and ultimately executed. Contemporary accounts describe the event with notable restraint, emphasizing legal justification and moral rhetoric rather than explicit violence. Yet the outcome represented one of the more severe fates experienced by a Byzantine empress. The removal of Agnes of France, another imperial consort entangled in Komnenian succession struggles, further illustrates how empresses could become instruments within broader factional conflicts. Historical records indicate that Agnes, married first to Alexios II and later associated with Andronikos Komnenos, occupied a politically symbolic position that outlasted the regimes around her. Surviving chronicles suggest that her changing marital affiliations reflected strategic attempts by successive rulers to harness dynastic legitimacy. When political priorities shifted, Agnes's influence was quietly curtailed through relocation and controlled court presence rather than overt punishment. This form of displacement underscores that removal did not always require formal deposition. Administrative marginalization could achieve similar objectives while avoiding destabilizing controversy. The Paleologan period continued to demonstrate the persistence of these patterns, though with additional complexity arising from imperial fragmentation and external pressures. Empress Anna of Savoy's regency during the minority of John V Palaiologos provides a revealing example. Historical records indicate that Anna governed amid financial crisis and civil war against John VI Cantacuzenios, relying on alliances with merchant communities and segments of the clergy. Contemporary accounts describe intense factional competition within Constantinople, where economic hardship amplified political polarization. Surviving documents suggest that Anna's regency maintained legitimacy among certain urban groups while provoking opposition from aristocratic factions aligned with Cantacuzenios. The resolution of the conflict did not produce immediate removal, but rather a negotiated power-sharing arrangement that gradually reduced Anna's direct authority. Chroniclers noted that her eventual withdrawal from active governance followed the stabilization of Cantacuzenios' position and the maturation of John V. Monastic retirement again functioned as the mechanism through which political transition was formalized. The pattern demonstrates how even regencies that avoided violent coups ultimately converged toward structured displacement once competing claims to authority were resolved. Empress Helena Cantacuzene offers another perspective on the intersection between dynastic negotiation and personal removal. As the wife of John V Palaiologos and daughter of John VI Cantacuzenios, Helena occupied a position linking rival political factions. Historical records indicate that her presence contributed to temporary reconciliation between competing branches of the imperial family. However, surviving chronicles suggest that the ongoing instability of the Paleologan period limited the protective effect of such connections. Helena's later withdrawal into monastic life following periods of political turbulence reflects the normalization of religious retirement as both personal decision and implicit political expectation for imperial women whose immediate influence had diminished. Legal codes and ceremonial manuals from the later Byzantine centuries reveal an increasing formalization of procedures surrounding imperial withdrawal. These documents describe protocols governing abdication, monastic tonsure, property transfer, and communication restrictions. Surviving evidence suggests that such codification aimed to minimize uncertainty during transitions while preserving imperial dignity. The empress, even when removed through coercive circumstances, was expected to participate in rituals that symbolically transformed political authority into spiritual vocation. This framework provided a culturally acceptable narrative that masked the coercive dimensions of palace coups while reinforcing the empire's ideological commitment to ordered hierarchy. The lived conditions experienced by displaced empresses during this period varied, depending on the political climate and the degree of perceived threat they posed. Contemporary accounts describe some former empresses retaining influence through correspondence with monastic communities, charitable foundations, and familial networks. Others experienced stricter confinement, particularly when rival factions feared their potential use as symbols of alternative legitimacy. Surveillance by palace agents, limitations on travel, and restrictions on financial resources appear frequently in surviving documents, indicating that removal involved sustained administrative oversight rather than a single decisive act. Chroniclers also noted the psychological implications of these transitions, though typically expressed through understated observation rather than emotive description. References to silence, withdrawal, and the redirection of patronage toward religious institutions suggest adaptive strategies through which former empresses navigated their altered circumstances. The establishment of monasteries, sponsorship of liturgical projects, and engagement with theological discourse allowed some displaced imperial women to retain forms of cultural and spiritual authority, even as political power was curtailed. The recurrence of palace coups affecting empresses reveals deeper structural tensions within Byzantine governance. Imperial ideology emphasized dynastic continuity and sacred rulership, yet the mechanisms required to maintain stability often necessitated the controlled removal of individuals embodying that legitimacy. Empresses, whose authority derived from marital and maternal association with emperors, became particularly sensitive indicators of shifting political priorities. Surviving documents suggest that their displacement frequently coincided with broader administrative recalibration, including fiscal reform, military reorganization, or the consolidation of new ruling coalitions. Over time, these patterns contributed to a collective understanding within the imperial household regarding the provisional nature of status. Historical records indicate that marriage negotiations, dowry arrangements, and educational preparation for imperial daughters increasingly reflected awareness of potential removal. Instruction in monastic customs, familiarity with religious patronage, and cultivation of clerical alliances appear as recurring elements in the upbringing of imperial women, suggesting that contingency planning for displacement had become embedded within dynastic culture. The documented experiences of these empresses therefore illuminate not only individual trajectories, but also the procedural logic underlying Byzantine political survival. Palace coups targeting imperial women functioned as mechanisms through which competing factions negotiated legitimacy, redistributed influence, and reasserted administrative cohesion. While the forms of removal varied, from mutilation and execution to negotiated retirement, the underlying objective remained consistent: the preservation of institutional continuity through the controlled redefinition of authority. Surviving documents from the final centuries of the Byzantine Empire indicate that the political vulnerability of empresses persisted even as the scale of imperial authority contracted under external pressure. The late Byzantine court operated within an environment marked by fiscal exhaustion, territorial fragmentation, and intensified diplomatic dependence on foreign powers. Contemporary accounts describe how these conditions did not diminish the ceremonial importance of empresses, but instead heightened the stakes surrounding succession and regency. The imperial household remained a focal point of legitimacy, and the removal of empresses continued to function as a mechanism through which competing factions sought to stabilize uncertain political landscapes. The experience of Empress Irene Asinina, wife of John VI Cantacazinos, reflects how political withdrawal could occur within negotiated transitions rather than abrupt coups. Historical records indicate that Irene actively supported her husband during the civil conflicts of the 14th century, managing logistical arrangements and maintaining connections with aristocratic networks. Chroniclers noted her presence in diplomatic correspondence and her role in sustaining factional cohesion during periods of military campaigning. However, surviving documents suggest that when John VI abdicated and entered monastic life, Irene's removal from political authority followed as a parallel process. Her transition into religious retirement demonstrates how abdication by an emperor often necessitated the simultaneous displacement of the empress, ensuring that the symbolic continuity of the previous regime did not remain available for political mobilization. Empress Anna of Savoy's later years further illustrate the long-term consequences of regency removal. After navigating civil conflict and power-sharing arrangements, Anna's authority gradually diminished as her son John V assumed independent rule, and subsequent political crises reshaped the court's priorities. Contemporary accounts describe her relocation to monastic life not as a dramatic deposition, but as a structured retreat aligned with established expectations for widowed or politically displaced imperial women. Surviving chronicles suggest that while Anna retained certain financial resources and maintained correspondence with religious institutions, her capacity to influence policy effectively disappeared. This form of removal underscores the distinction between ceremonial respect and practical exclusion that characterized many late Byzantine experiences. The case of Empress Helena Dragas, the wife of Manuel II Paleologos and mother of Constantine XI, reveals another dimension of imperial withdrawal shaped by dynastic transformation. Historical records indicate that Helena participated in court patronage and maintained close involvement with monastic communities even during her years as empress. Chroniclers noted that after Manuel II's death, Helena adopted monastic life under the name Hypomone, a decision that contemporary sources portray as both personal devotion and politically appropriate withdrawal.